Okay, so I think this is working. Um, the first chapter, or the first concept that we are going to discuss, is this idea of the relationship-based model and how important the infant and toddler years really are in development. This is from another textbook, a textbook that we aren't using in our course, but that has been used before in other classes. I kind of like this textbook better than the old one. Anyway, there's just some, some new things. So, anyway, I like to ramble, so I'm going to try and move on. All right, I'm going to skip this part where it talks about goals of the book. But what we really want to focus on is this idea of well-being. And there's a quote in this text that talks about how a child feels and thinks about him or herself, and the joy and satisfaction that the child experiences in regard to his or her relationships and accomplishments are a part of that child's well-being. And I want you to think about your own experiences, and when you consider your well-being, what do you think of when you think of my well-being? Is it how I think and feel about myself? Is it when I consider my well-being, is it me experiencing joy and satisfaction in the relationships that I have in life, things that I'm accomplishing in life? Does that fall into my concept of well-being? And we want that to be in our concept of well-being for infants and toddlers who become, whether they're our own children or, children in our care. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk a little bit about is competence. And when you think of competence, your own competence to, of course, to be able to complete a task, or to be able to engage in something with your peers, whether you're in the marching band or whether you're on the dance squad, or whatever it may be. You think about your competence and what that means to you. So I'm over here honestly trying to fumble and find something that I was looking for that I really wanted to share with you, but I'm going to keep it moving. So when we think about competence, as you see on the screen, competence is effectively adjusts to day-to-day changes. So if we want children who are competent, if we want adults who are competent in the caregiving of young children, they need to be able to effectively adjust to changes in children's lives, changes in parents' lives. So we want caregivers to be competent. And what are some things that make us competent? As you consider this idea of competence, when you leave your child with someone, what is it that you want them to be able to do? So competence, how do you adjust to day-to-day changes? Are you adaptable? Is the adult in the room with the infant or the toddler able to adapt? Children are constantly changing. Children are constantly evolving. They're growing, they're learning, and adults need to be able to adapt to the child. Children shouldn't have to adapt to their teacher, especially infants. And we know that that's not going to happen, right? It's not feasible for a 2-month-old to adapt to the changes in your life as an adult. So adults have to adapt and competently to the changes in children's lives. And lastly, adults have got to be flexible. Flexibility is so key when you're working with young children in general, all children, but definitely when you're working with infants and toddlers. So you're going through things like teething, which when you have a child who is teething, their whole schedule changes. in many cases. They are in pain, they are grumpy, they have diarrhea, they have fever, all of the above, in some cases. And so you have to be flexible as the competent adult. And that's what I want you to take away from this concept of competence. Am I able to adjust to changes? Am I adaptable? And can I be flexible enough when my children need me to be, when their parents need me to be flexible? Those types of things. And then, of course, I'll say in all of that, that also does not just mean that you're going to bend over and change at the drop of a hat. Yes, there are some things that don't change. For instance, let's say your center closes at 6, but you have a parent who's consistently late. You might know the reason why, but if the rules are what they are, that you have to pay extra or you're dismissed from the center, you can't provide that flexibility there. Maybe there's something else that you can do to provide flexibility for a parent in need. And we can talk about that more in class. Developmental outcomes. And we talk about this all the time. The infant and toddler classrooms, we should see our infants and toddlers increasing in their abilities in learning, language, motor, emotional, and social skills. Bottom line, that is our job, to help our children develop, to be there to facilitate and to provide the appropriate environment for them to develop in all of those areas, right? Quality of life. Now, some people have maybe some different perspectives about what a quality of life might be. When you think of quality of life, what do you think of? If you say, hey, I want a good quality of life, what does that mean for you? All right, well, for infants and toddlers, a quality of life, the child's feelings about his or her value or worth, or their living conditions, the relationships that he or she experiences, all of these things are a part of the quality of life that a child lives, that adults live even. But we're talking about children. So when we talk about quality of life, we want children to feel value. We want them to feel that they are worthy. We want them to feel as happy as they can about their living conditions, or feel trusting about the relationships that he or she is experiencing. Be a part of this, be in the moment, love, so on and so forth. You get the picture? So what I really want you to do is to do your very best to understand that infant and toddler caregivers are truly helping our children increase their quality of life. Mental health. All right, so when toddlers reach age 3, they will be mentally healthy if they can do the following 9 things. Feel competent and confident. Enjoy intimate and caring relationships. Feel safe. Have their basic trust in others. Regulate and express emotions in healthy ways. Communicate and are understood. Feel valued for their unique personalities. Have the energy and curiosity to learn. And finally, enjoy excellent health and nutrition. All of this goes into mental health. How many of you did not think that one of these 9 things would impact a child's mental health, or 2, be an indicator that a child would be mentally healthy? It's okay to be honest. There's nobody around you, so raise your hand, put a thumbs up. Maybe one or more of these were not something you thought of, and that's okay too, right? So we can talk about this more in class, and this might be a key point that you really want to talk about in your reflection. So as you consider mental health and mentally healthy children, think about these 9 things. And I also want you to consider, why are we discussing mental health for infants and toddlers? Why is it so important that children or a focus be made on mentally healthy children before they even reach age 3? What's the big deal? All right, now let's get into this concept of this relationship-based model of infant and toddler caregiving. I don't want to, I hate to just read it straight to you, but this whole concept is that this relationship-based model actually recognizes that constructive caring relationships are fundamental to the human experience. We know that. We know that in our own lives we cannot function if the relationships that we're in, whether they are our significant others, our parents, our grandparents, our best friends, our associates, our not so best friends, if these relationships are not constructive and we don't feel caring within that relationship, then our experiences as a human being are not going to be the best. We might not be mentally healthy. We might not be safe and secure or feel safe and secure. So these relationships are so vital to our lives as humans. Sometimes people forget that they are so vital for infants and toddlers as well. And we'll talk about how that's connected to theory a little bit later. So the relationship model is a model where constructive caring relationships are fundamental to the infant and toddler development. I'm going to say it again. A model where constructive caring relationships are fundamental to the infant and toddler development. So infants and toddlers are going to need loving adults to protect them, nurture them, help them learn. And when adults respond respectfully to children, they promote the child's strengths. So here we're looking at respectful responses from other people, other adults who are in charge, who are in the care, or who are caring for, rather, infants and toddlers. It's so important for the children's sense of security, self-worth, self-confidence, and even their motivation to learn. Oftentimes, if I don't feel respected in an environment, I'm not motivated to do anything. And you know that as adults. And you can count the times where you've been in a situation where, man, I'm not motivated to do anything. I know you don't care about me. I know you don't think I can do it. So guess what? I'm not going to do it. If we create these beautiful spaces for our infants and toddlers in these so precious early years, the likelihood that they can build that self-worth and that self-confidence early on increases tremendously. And lastly, what is a responsive adult? A responsive adult is someone who is sensitive and caring to the needs of the child. And we really need to understand that I have to be responsive and respectful. And I think there are actually 3 R's: responsive, respectful, and reciprocal is another way to discuss the relationships between children and families and their teachers. But adults have to be responsive and sensitive and caring. And you will see in your infant and toddler classrooms, hopefully, that this is a type of relationship that teachers are building with children. Here's a great model. It might look a little complex at first, but this is the relationship-based model for the infant and toddler development and program planning. So here you can see that infants and toddlers exist within this entire network of relationships. So they're If you have the child in the middle, the nucleus, the little dot, you have relationships with the parent and the child, the family and the child. There are, if you keep going around, there's relationships between the teacher and the parent, the teacher and the child, peer relationships, family relationships, family and parent relationships. And trying to think of another way. So if you think about it like this, a relationship-based model can predict that the quality of the relationships in one dyad, which is two people who kind of interact with one another, like the teacher and the child, that's a dyad. That's two people interacting. You can actually forgot what I was to say. So the relationship in one dyad will actually affect the quality of the relationships in the other dyads. So if there is a breakdown, if you will, between the interactions between the parent and the child, that can impact the interactions between the teacher and the child. If there's a breakdown in the interaction between the teacher and the parent, that can impact the relationships between the child and the peer. These networks of relationships and how people interact with one another are so dependent upon one another that when one dyad is not working well, it can impact all of the others and tremendously impact them. So if there are problems at home, and which is typically where we have the conversation, if there are problems at home, there could very well be problems at school that stem from that, or vice versa. If there are problems in school, then there could very well be problems in home as well. The other thing that I want to talk about when we look at this model is that you can see there's the individual on the left, and there's the individual and how the individual, there's a relationship between the network and the individual. And then on the right you have ecology. There's this concept of culture and community. And on the left, there are individual capacity, individual attributes, individual uniquenesses. And all of that, this entire network impacts development and behavior. So at the bottom, you'll see emotional, social, cognitive, language, and motor skills. So it's a complex model, this particular diagram. But if you really look at it and understand that everything impacts something else. And that's the big thing that you need to really take away from. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this concept of ecology and how ecology, which is just another word for environment, how ecology, including the child's culture, the child's individual characteristics, how all of that influence the features of the relationships that a child experiences. So we can discuss theories that support this. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about how ecology and then the child's individual attributes and characteristics can influence the child's relationships. So the two sides of this model, the ecology side and the child side, how does the environment and who the child is naturally, how does that impact the relationships that they have? So think about yourself, knowing who you are, the individual, knowing that there's a whole network of relationships that you do have, and then also understanding that you are in an environment. You are in multiple environments in many cases. How is all of that impacting the relationships that you have? You, the person, and all of your attributes and uniquenesses, the beautiful uniquenesses that you have, and the environment, the ecology, the culture around you, the community around you. How does all of that work together to impact the relationships you have in life? It works the same for adults as it does for children. Children just don't have the ability to speak up, especially infants, and express how these things are impacting them. So I think we're going to move forward here. Hold on, I'm going to step back. Let's talk a little bit about ecology real quick, and then we'll move on to the next. The next slide talks about, the bioecological system theory. So that'll be our first theory that we're really going to dive into. So ecology, we know, is the environment. How does the environment or ecology, and I want you to try to use ecology, that's a new term for you maybe in this context. So from now on, I want you to use ecology when you mean in child's environment. So when infants and toddlers are physically, emotionally, and cognitively healthy, and they experience positive relationships, it's because of a support system that involves family, culture, the neighborhood, community, and a society that knows how and cares deeply about the importance of the first 3 years of life. So remember, this is not necessarily something that has been happening for years and years and years and years. If you were in curriculum and program planning or in Intro to Early Childhood, and you may have talked about Head Start movements in 1960s. 1965 is when we had Head Start, but it was Head Start, it wasn't Early Head Start. We just, in the past, I'm going to say 10 years, but don't quote me on that right this second, had something called Early Head Start, which was actually Head Start for infants and toddlers, and not just preschool children. So everyone, keep in mind, everyone has not seen the benefits of good quality relationship building or good quality educational experiences or learning experiences for children between birth and 3 until the past decade. So this is really very new research, and it's actually one of the more cutting-edge approaches to infant and toddler care. And it can definitely help you get jobs in the future if you wish to work with infants and toddlers, if you understand and know this stuff. So anyway, according to the bioecological systems theory, which is Bronfenbrenner, the ecology, the personal and physical environment, all of these things influence the nature of the relationships that the child experiences. These relationships are mostly influenced by your immediate setting, like your family, your community, and the early care and education program that the child is experiencing. So whatever child care facility the child is in, the family, the immediate community, those things will impact the child first and foremost before anything else does. So those relationships, if you think about it, have got to be strong. They have got to be supportive. If one of those 3 things is not supportive, what kinds of things do you think will happen in that child's life, or could potentially happen for that child? So let's talk about the bioecological systems theory. Now here, this particular theory, it talks about relationships, but it really is how the setting where a child is developing in, where they live, they interact with other individuals, but it's how the setting that a developing child lives interacts with the child's biological characteristics to influence development. So based on who you are as a child, biologically, based on your uniqueness, based on your genetics, based on your personal biological growth, how does the setting that you live in impact or influence your development, even though you have all these biological things going on inside? So we know that relationships are influenced by people and the environment. We know that relationships are influenced by cultural values, what our families believe in. We know that relationships are also influenced by policies and laws. That's where like DSS really comes into play, NACI standards come into play, other federally funded programs like Head Start, policies that are passed down, laws that are made, whether they are beneficial to young children or whether they're detrimental. Laws related to who can receive SNAP benefits impact young children. Laws related to who can receive WIC impact the development of young children, right? So think about it from a bigger perspective. Maybe we can look at some specific laws that have been passed in South Carolina that are directly impacting infants and toddlers today. Okay? All right, so we talked about this biological aspect of the child. So what is it? What are children's attributes and capacities, and how do they affect relationships? So attributes, gender, temperament, appearance, capacities. That's the ability to be social, express your emotion, learn, move, communicate. There is a constant interplay between the child's attributes and capacities and the environment or the ecology. So think about, especially, what about everything that's been in the news about transgender individuals? There are transgender men and women who say that they knew it when they were 3 years old or earlier, that they did not feel like the gender that they were assigned. Okay? Think about things like that. Okay? Physical attributes. And then the child's capacity. So if I already don't feel like society is telling me I should feel, how is that going to impact my ability to be social? Or how is that going to impact my ability to express my emotions and communicate effectively with you within my ecology? Do you see what I'm saying? All right, think about it from another perspective. A child's appearance. Let's talk about a child with disabilities, maybe a child with Down syndrome, who may still also not be able to express emotions depending on the severity of the syndrome. But we know that children with Down syndrome have different facial features. They do not typically develop. And so how does that attribute, that physical attribute that they have, and their ability to be social or express themselves or even communicate, they may be nonverbal, how does all of that interplay or interact with or connect to the ecology that the child is living in? It's a very deep question, and I really want you to think about it. It might be something that maybe you've thought of in the past. Maybe something has happened. Maybe you know someone who has a specific attribute. And these don't have to be negative attributes, by the way. I mean, we could be talking about, if we're talking about appearance, completely gorgeous. Like babies that appear to be typically developing and have no flaws physically, but when we look at capacities, they may have no ability to communicate effectively. They may be nonverbal, but be gorgeous on the outside. Do you see what I mean? We make assumptions about people. So just understand the big idea is that children's biological characteristics, their attributes and their capacities are impacted or have some sort of connection between the environment that they're living in, the ecology around them. And if you have more questions, write them down and we can talk some more about that. Or you can do a little bit of research if you'd like to look some stuff up on that as well. All right, before I move, I hate to scoot forward. Before I go forward, I want to touch on this thing called transactional theory. which is actually a little bit about what we just talked about. Transactional theory is going to highlight how the feelings and the reactions of families and teachers are affected by their children's attributes. So age, biological makeup, gender, temperament, appearance. So again, transactional theory is going to highlight how the feelings and reactions of families and teachers are affected by children's attributes. So transactional theory actually emphasizes this ongoing reciprocal nature, the give and take, of the effects of the child's and the environment's characteristics and behavior on each other. It's a transaction, okay? So that's one of your earlier theories, transactional theory, how there's a give and take, a reciprocal nature between the child, the effects of the child's and the environment characteristics and behavior on one another. I'm trying to think. Let me think. I'll give you an example. How about a family that might be under stress? They have outside support from their relatives and friends, or a community program that may help them out. A family that might be isolated from relatives or friends and have a difficult time with a child who may be fussy, or a child who may be going through something. If you don't have that support, and you have a baby who cries often and requires an adult who is really a sensitive adult who can respond to that child, when families perceive that they have this support from a shared community, the family and the child in that family are more likely to thrive. They're more likely to have a better well-being, better mental health, better social health. So we want to see an interaction between the environment and the child, because we know it's going to happen naturally. But the more we can step in and help, the better. Right. Infants and toddlers do come into the world with many capacities. They have, like we said, the ability to be social, express their emotions, they can learn, they can communicate, they can move. These capacities are going to blossom throughout the infant and toddler years within loving relationships with family members and other caring adults and peers. Think about, I might show you a video of feral children, or children who have been taken away from all people or communication and locked away, and what happens to those children. And sometimes when you can see the complete opposite, like the worst case scenario, you really understand how relationships are so vital to healthy growth and development of young children. Let's go ahead and move forward. So there's this research on the importance of relationships. Like I said, research conducted in the United States found that young infants and toddlers who feel safe and secure with their mother, father, and other family members feel less stressed and can express and control emotions in healthy ways, which is called self-regulation, compared to young children who experience fearful or anxious relationships. So children who are more safe and secure have the ability to develop better self-regulation, and that is through the studies done and conducted by the individuals listed in that citation. All right, so how do parents help young children feel secure? How do people make you feel secure? What do you like for people to do so you feel secure? Well, children can feel secure when their parents are responsive and affectionate, and when adults support the children's self-directed activities and autonomy. All right, so that one is really specific, because what we typically are seeing in many infant and toddler programs is, and you can see it in preschool programs as well, is there are no self-directed activities. Autonomy is like independence. But who's making all the activities? Who's planning everything? Who's putting the curriculum together? It's the adults. And what we notice is that children, when they have the opportunity to make some decisions, I don't want my apple to be red, I want my apple to be purple. Okay? All right, I want to color my apple purple and I want to paint it with whatever I want to paint. I want to paint it with a toothbrush. I don't want to paint it with a paintbrush like Johnny over there. We got toothbrushes in the paint area. Why can't I use a toothbrush? You see what I mean? So if we got some choices and children feel like, hey, I'm a little bit in charge of kind of where I'm going, where I want to go. Not that we're saying there's no structure and that there's no, I hate to say structured environment, but, or that there's chaos, but a self-directed activity would be an activity that a child chose to do on his or her own. And if the adults can support that child's ability to make those selections, then children, we typically see them feeling a little bit more secure and in the choices that they do make, and they oftentimes do very well in school. The quality of the parent-child relationship will also influence the quality of peer relationships. If my mama makes me feel like I'm unworthy and I don't feel like I fit in my own home, or I feel neglected, then I am most likely going to have negative relationships with the kids around me, with the children around me. So children with less positive parent-child relationships are likely to be more aggressive than the children who experience more positive relationships. And again, this is based on research, okay? So we're going to talk a lot about responsiveness in this class. And so I want you to understand that responsiveness means adult sensitivity and reaction to children's facial expressions, body postures, gestures, and words. Again, responsiveness, that's the adult's sensitivity and reaction to a child's facial expression, body postures, gestures, and words. Responsiveness occurs moment to moment. It's an interaction with the child, and over time, as the adult plans future interactions and environment and experiences that meet the child's needs and interests, is going to grow. Adult responsiveness influences how infants and toddlers expect other people to treat them. Think about that. How adults respond to infants and toddlers lets the children know, this is how I should expect other people to treat me. So if we want to grow healthy girls and boys, children in this world who know that they are worthy of respect, then we have to give that to them as adults in their classrooms, right? I mean, that's a really powerful statement. So I want you to think about that. And think about what responsiveness means as we continue to go through. I think you'll be able to rewind this and listen to it again if you need to. But I think that's a really profound statement. Excuse me. So, what will predict more secure attachments? What predicts more secure attachments? People who are sensitive to infant distress, people who are emotionally available, and people who are responsive. And emotionally available literally means I am here for you. I am not just physically here, but I am here for you emotionally. I can accept what you're going through, and I can support you as you work through it. And we talked about responsiveness already, where responsiveness is how the adult's sensitivity and reaction to the child's expressions and how important that is for them. When infants and toddlers experience secure relationships with care teachers, they are more socially competent. They have been seen to have better language development. They can regulate their emotions, and they participate more in problem solving, which is very interesting, huh? Why do you think secure relationships with a care teacher, a caregiver, is going to help children feel socially competent, help them have better language skills or development, regulate their emotions, or participate more in problem-solving activities? Why do you think that is so important? What do care teachers do to help infants and toddlers feel secure? So you may be saying, great, I know I need to help the child feel secure, Ms. Strickland, but how am I going to do that? Well, here you go. Infants and toddlers can feel more secure if their teachers are highly involved. Hold them, hug them, engage them in conversation. They can be in conversation with you when you are changing their diapers, when you are feeding them, when you're getting them settled down for rest time, when you're playing with them for tummy time. You have to be involved. You have to be. And there is no such thing as spoiling a child. I think at least until 6 months is what I heard. But it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as spoiling a baby. So hold that baby, hug that baby, keep them engaged in conversation. Also, you have to be sensitive. You have to be warm, attentive, engaging, inviting, loving, kissy, kissy. These are babies. These are infants and toddlers, and they need you. They need you so much. You have to be sensitive to their needs. And lastly, you need to provide many opportunities for them to learn in an interesting environment. Keep your environment interesting, people. Don't make it dull. So I think that's an extremely important part as well. We need exciting and inviting spaces to live in, learn in. And it is your job as the teacher to make that happen. And when you go down and you observe in the classrooms, think about these things. Are these teachers highly involved? Do they hold the children, hug the children, engage them in conversation? Are they sensitive? Do they provide opportunities for the infants and toddlers to learn in interesting environments? What do care teachers do to help them feel secure? Continue, all right? We're going to talk about, I said continue rather. They provide continuity of care, and you'll see that's red because that's a really, really, really big concept. Continuity of care means that at least one of those care teachers is going to move up with the group as the group gets older. So all care teachers are going to stay with the group as they age. So that means that you'll have a classroom of maybe 0, like birth through age 3. Let's say that. You'll have a group of children. They may not be in the same space, but the care teacher, the caregiver is going to move up with the child as the child gets older. Oh, excuse me, I'm yawning. If you provide children in programs with one or more teachers who stay with them throughout their first 3 years, the likelihood that they are going to feel secure and feel safe increases. The children are going to be able to develop close, trusting, affectionate relationships. I don't have to worry about learning a new teacher next year. I know who my teacher's going to be. At a child care, children are more positive with their peers. At home, they've seen children become less negative and less aggressive, and children have increased cognitive and language skills because they are in programs that offer continuity of care. Developing programs that offer continuity of care is not easy. You're talking about keeping the children with the same group of teachers as they continue to grow. All right. When teachers don't move with their children, the children can experience loss. I miss my teacher. She's gone forever. He's gone forever. The more caregiver losses that an infant and toddler has to experience by the time they're preschoolers, the more likely they are to be socially withdrawn and aggressive with their peers. So having to have a new teacher every time and worrying about losing someone that I've learned to love impacts you as you move to the next year. Think about it as an adult. Constantly think about these things from your perspective. Okay? If you have to keep picking up the pieces, for instance, if you're in a marriage or a long-term relationship, you've been with somebody for 10 years, that falls apart. You want to move on with your life, right? But now you got to learn somebody new, right? You got to learn all their intricacies. I got to learn how they like their eggs cooked. I got to learn how they like their clothes folded. I got to learn, whose mama is whose mama's cooking you can eat and whose mama's cooking you can't eat. Whatever the little things are. As adults, those things impact us as well. Think about babies. Think about infants and toddlers. They move from new teacher to new teacher in those first 3 years of life. They don't experience continuity, and it is traumatizing for them. What if we can create an environment where they stay with one or both caretakers for the first 3 years all together? Who benefits in that situation? What are the benefits? A recent study of over 1,000 toddlers found that when at least one care teacher moved up with the group, or all of the teachers stayed with the group, the following things happened. Children and teachers developed close, trusting relationships. At child care, children were more positive. At home, they were less aggressive, and the children had increased cognitive skills. We already talked about that. All right, I'm going to leave that right there for a second. I need to check our time, but we only have 9 more slides. I'm going to finish these up. So here's the whole thing. There's an importance of the infancy period. All right? Early childhood is both the most critical and the most vulnerable time in any child's development. And that's Brazelton and Greenspan. And you'll hear a little bit more about T. Barry Brazelton. He's done a lot of work. He spent his entire career working with infants and toddlers and writing books for families. Early childhood is both the most critical and the most vulnerable time in any child's development. All right, so you have to also understand, and I think, the next slide gives us some definitions. So when we talk about prenatal, that's conception to birth. Now, typically we're looking at full term being 38 weeks, and there are some mothers who deliver at 37 weeks, 36 weeks. There are some mothers who deliver extremely prematurely and their children do live, and there are some mothers who experience premature birth and their children don't live. But prenatal, when we talk about prenatal, we're talking about conception all the way to birth. All right? Infancy is birth to 18 months. Okay? What's that? 18 months, that's 12 and a half, so that's a year and a half. Toddler is 18 months to 3 years. Infant and toddler professional, that's somebody that has a broad range of specialists who work in child development and educational programs. And when this slide talks about a care teacher, it's talking about the professional who has received the training to work with young children. So those of you who are getting degrees in in child and family studies, you are the care teacher. And you are also going to be and can be the infant and toddler professional if that's the area that you choose to work in when you graduate. Okay, so you have the infant and toddler professional, but you also have what's called a care teacher. So why are these years important? Okay, early experiences influence the children's ability to learn, their feelings of self-worth, we've talked about that, their sense of competence, we've talked about that, and the capacity to love and care for others. If the experiences in the beginning of life suck, okay, for lack of a better word, if they are unsavory, if they are traumatic, if children are experiencing these major ecological downfalls, their ability to learn, their ability to have great self-worth, to be competent in themselves, and their ability to love others is going to diminish. So good quality early care for infants and toddlers is so important, and it can't just happen within the walls of the child care facility. There has to be that relationship building between the caregivers and the parents or the families who are taking care of the child as well, so that you need to know, hey, something might be going on that's a factor that's going to impact whether or not this child is having a great early experience in life. That is your job as the infant toddler caregiver. Because, here you go, we're looking at brain development. So there was a publication called From Neurons to Neighborhoods, The Science of Early Childhood Development. Now, From Neurons to Neighborhood actually highlights a lot of the important research that illustrates the significance of these early life experiences. This book focused on the central role of positive and loving relationships in a child's life and the capacity of young children to bounce back, to be able to move forward, so on. But the authors also expressed their concern in that book about the features of modern life that can contribute to stress for families. Stress is a killer, people. Stress is bad. So if you have infants and toddlers who are stressed and their brains are not fully developed yet, imagine how detrimental that stress is to their personal development. All right, when we look at brain development, we have some things called windows of opportunity, which are these special periods of time where certain types of learning takes place. Okay, so there might be a certain time in the first 6 months where some kind of learning needs to happen or is going to naturally happen. You also have sensitive periods. Now these are periods when positive or negative experiences are most likely to have a sustained effect. So we've got windows of opportunity, and if there are things taking place that are supposed to be taking place, most likely we're going to get some positive results and have some positive effects of it. But if negative things occur, then the likelihood that we're going to have some success, the child is going to have success in developing self-worth or self-competence or any of the other things we've talked about, is going to decrease. It's going to negatively be impacted. All right, so you got some core concepts for development, okay? Let me pull down a little bit. So, core concepts of development. Both nature and nurture affect children's development. So there's something out there, and I know you've heard the nature versus nurture debate. Nature means that genetic influences on the growth and development of a child. So nature means this is happening because of who I am genetically, my biological makeup. Nurture rather, those are the influences of the environment, experiences, and the education on the growth and development of the child. So there's the nature versus nurture debate is huge, huge. But if you look at number 2, cultural influences influence development and child-rearing beliefs and practices as well. So culture is going to definitely impact a child's development. Culture being what my family believes in, what my family practices on a regular basis. All of these things impact a child's development. Number 3 is self-regulation. That's an important indicator of development. If a child can regulate his or her emotions, then that's a sign that the child is developing naturally or developing what would be considered typically developing. So not outside of what's considered the norm. All right, number 4, children contribute to their own development through their active exploration. That is why we say children learn through play. They are helping themselves learn and understand the world around them just because they're natural inquirers and they need to be allowed to do so. So your infant and toddler rooms have to be developed in a way that will impact the child's ability to learn, okay? And it has to be a challenge sometimes. Not all the time, like you can't create a giant obstacle course in your classroom, but you can create with some help ways that children can move around the room to explore. Number 5, human relationships and the effects of relationships on relationships are the building blocks of healthy development. Relationships are so extremely important. If relationships have the effect on other relationships, so this means that what infants learn in their first relationship is how to be in a relationship. When you're holding me in your arms and I'm crying and I'm distraught, if I know that when I'm distraught someone is going to hold me, then I grow up and I know somebody is hurt. So what do? I hold them. Think about that. You teach me as an infant what it means to be in a relationship with someone. Whether it's a romantic relationship, we're not talking about that kind of, but just to be in a relationship with another individual. So if the initial relationships are satisfying and enjoyable, children learn to trust, communicate, negotiate. They learn how to show empathy and cooperate with their parents and others. But if the relationships are constant, if the relationships produce anxiety and they're confusing and they're frightening, babies are going to have this emotional energy and this negative feelings about them. They're not going to want to explore. They're not going to want to investigate the world around them. They're not going to want to have anything to do with you. So we teach children how to have relationships by building a relationship with them healthily. Okay? There's a broad range of differences. Okay? We know that we can't say normal anymore. I mean, what's normal to one person is definitely not normal to another. But there are many variations of motor, language, and adaptive development. However, some children who aren't saying clear words by the age of 2 might eventually start talking. Others may have a hearing impairment or an auditory disorder that has to be diagnosed, so that the appropriate interventions can occur. But because there's such a broad range of differences, it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between individual differences in development and what might be a developmental delay. So when you have questions about that, you can look back through developmental milestones or developmental sequences to see, just to confirm, hey, I'm kind of concerned. And typically, if you have 3 or 4 red flags or a child's not meeting multiple milestones, that's when you need to be concerned. But if a child's just not talking, but everything else is cool, then you really don't normally have anything to worry about. 7 is the development of children is continuous and discontinuous. What do you say, Ms. Strickland? That sounds contradictory. Well, yeah, a little bit. So as the infant goes from this reflexivity where they hold the rattle and then they start to suck on it, then they start to bang it, then they figure out they can throw it, and then they can look at it. The infant is demonstrating a continuous trajectory of development. This is continuous development. The infant seems to progress forward in the acquisition of skills that help him or her learn about an object like a rattle, right? So each skill builds on the other skill, the previous skill. But the discontinuity is going to occur at significant points when the child's behavior seems very different from the age before. For example, you have a 7-month-old as opposed to a 2-month-old. 7-month-olds have these clusters of skills that propel them to be really social, and they act as if they understand that their thoughts, feelings, and actions can be understood by other people. All right? So toddlers also seem like they're world apart from infants because they develop, all of these skills that contribute to their independence. All right? But these points of rapidly increasing skills are in development are considered transition points, as they have an effect on both how the baby views the world and how the caregivers actually interact with the child. So when a baby begins to walk, the baby views the world differently, and the caregiver views the baby as more capable. Does that make sense? If we need to talk more about the continuity and discontinuity in development, we can. But for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving. Infants and toddlers are vulnerable and resistant. They are vulnerable to just anything and everything. The little hearts can be destroyed at any moment. Like 1-year-olds who experience a lot of anguish. They might experience excessive hunger, or they might cry for hours on time for somebody to come and pick them up out of their crib. This child can feel vulnerable, helpless, defenseless even, and be very open to further trauma. So what are the sources of vulnerability? What are the reasons that these things are happening to this child? What is going on in the family that could be happening? Could there be alcoholism? Could there be mental illness? Could there be criminal activity? Could it be extreme poverty that is just contributing to family stress? And, it builds on top of one another. It builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. That makes a child vulnerable, and it impacts the child so devastatingly. But even though those things are taking place, there are sources of resilience. Now, resilience is, the ability to be able to thrive no matter what's going on in life. That I'm resilient. I can thrive and I can bounce back. Well, this child who's experienced all these issues or these concerns in his or her ecology in their environment, and they have these positive turnarounds sometimes, where the source of resilience might be within the child. The child could be easygoing, have an engaging temperament, a curious mind. Resilience can come from the child's family, someone who is supportive, a loving grandfather or a mother who may at first have been neglectful for whatever reason, but goes to school, has a change in life, has new positive ways of interacting with his or her child. The baby can bounce back because they are resilient. Every person has a source of vulnerability, and every person has a source of resiliency. The timing of early experiences matter, and children are open to change. The timing of early experiences really do matter, and the timing and children are really open to change, sorry. So the importance of a responsive, caring environment during the first 3 years of life can't be disputed. All right, we can't deny that. However, a wonderful infancy is not a magical immunization against later troubles in life. So a 3-year-old could be bright, full of zip, caring, engaging, face unbelievable trauma as a 4-year-old or as a teenager, right? A result of stress and trauma can be an erosion to the child, their trust, their sense of worth, their competency, and then the developing child remains vulnerable to risks at all ages. If we're constantly vulnerable as we grow and develop, and we don't experience any resilience, how does that impact us? How does that impact the relationships we have with others for the rest of our lives if we can never bounce back, if we never get to bounce back, if we're never resilient? How does it impact us? So I guess I just really want you to consider how a child who has an emotional first 3 years, a difficult first 3 years, and has challenging behaviors may respond beautifully to a loving adult who sincerely believes that that child believes in that child's positive characteristics and supports the child with consistent caring in an environment that promotes competence. So even if you have a horrible first 3 years of life, there is still hope that you can continue to grow and be successful. I promise you that. And lastly, people, early intervention can make a difference. There are early intervention services. We have Bright Start. We have Early Autism Project. We have many agencies here in Columbia, South Carolina that can help. Early intervention services include services or programs for children who are considered at risk. I don't necessarily like that term, but at risk, and children with disabilities and their families. So we can talk about these programs later on. We can talk about what we have here in Columbia later on. But these are those 10 core concepts, what we just talked about, the 10 core concepts that are positive, responsive, mutual, and protective when it comes to adult, infant, and adult-toddler relationships. These are the main ideas, and these are the main ideas that we will talk about, and I want you to remember throughout this entire time we have together this summer. Very young children need adults to help them become an important part of their community and culture, and support them in learning how to be healthy, caring, and constructive members of society. Just some demographics. Approximately 12 million infants and toddlers in the United States. We are becoming increasingly diverse, culturally, racially, linguistically. 21% of children under the age of 5 live in poverty. We might actually even have an assignment where we look this up for the state of South Carolina. But think about that, 21%. Okay, so if we think about early development and education programs, so we look at child care, This is non-parental child care while parents are at work. So when we're at the Child Development Center, we will see the children there, no parents there unless their parent is an educator there. Parents are off working, doing their thing. There are multiple types of settings. You have home child care, you have small child care, you have large child care, child care provided by the neighbor next door. A center can be a nonprofit, a for-profit, a national chain like Gateway or Sunshine House. Those are national chains. You can have a church school like Bethel AME. You can have an on-site business like, oh, it looks like our battery's going to die. We need to close it out. Like at the Strom Thurmond building, the federal building, they have federal child care right there on site. Let's see. Issues of affordability and quality are always important when we talk about child care. We want good quality, and can we get good quality that's affordable? And can workers be paid? That's another question. And there might be some questions on the effects of group care, meaning, you know, how does group care impact the development of the child as he or she grows? We talked a little bit about early intervention programs for children considered at risk. I don't like at risk because I think we're all at risk for anything at any time, but that is what this text chooses. So you have what I talked about earlier, early Head Start, which is comprehensive services, health, educational, dental, nutrition, mental health services. You have to have high family involvement. In early Head Start, families have to be active. And you have strong evaluation results for early Head Start programs. Irreducible needs. What are irreducible needs? These are the needs of children that are absolutely necessary for them to survive and thrive. Again, irreducible needs are the needs that are necessary for children to thrive and survive. So they have to have ongoing nurturing relationships, physical protection, safety, and regulation. They have to have experiences tailored to their needs, to their differences. They have to have developmentally appropriate experiences. We have to set limits. They need structure, and there have to be expectations for them. They have to have stable communities and cultural continuity, and they have to have adults who will protect their future. And that is the end of this first section. If you feel like I went a little fast, I believe you can rewind and go back through again if you need to. I'll post the PowerPoint as well as the 1 hour and 13 minutes of recording. I think you can see me now instead of the screen, so I don't want to be on here. I love you, and I'll talk to you soon.